Jessica finds herself lying on a stranger's bed, with a stranger wearing a horse head mask looming over her. Scared out of her mind, she is unable to move or speak, only seeing the ceiling above her. The person with the horse head mask then stabs a pale woman, who is already covered in blood. Jessica wakes up from her nightmare to the sound of her mother, Catalin, calling and asking that she attends her grandmother's funeral. Jessica reaches the train station to begin her journey to her family. She takes a train to reach her home, reading about lucid dreaming as she does so. The book is by Routledge, who recommends that she reads it to become more aware of her dream state and crush what troubles her subconscious mind. The book shows the horse as a symbol from the subconscious mind, representing passing into the next life. Jessica is sleepy through her travels, eventually taking a nap to waste time. She reaches her mother's home at night, walking through a metal gate and meeting her family's dog. At the door of the house, she meets George, who ushers her inside. Catalin is arguing with Jessica's stepfather, Jim, interrupted by Jessica's entrance to the living room. They share introductions and pleasantries, until she is handed a flashlight to navigate to her room. On her way, she sees a horse mask, thinking nothing of it and moving on. She tries to turn on the lights when a sudden surge reveals a woman behind her. Jessica does not see the woman, so she enters the room and becomes comfortable. Catalin is sitting in a candlelit room, worried about something. She eventually falls asleep in her place, and Jim leaves her in a peaceful state to relax. In another room, George and Jessica have a conversation about her mother. George thinks Jessica should be more respectful, but some troubles in their relationship seem to make it difficult. George understands and remains sensitive to Jessica's comments, switching to comments about her grandfather. Her grandfather appears to have a strong presence in the family, being a significant reason for Jessica's situation with her mother. Jessica then gets ready to take a bath. Inside the tub, she falls asleep, immediately entering a nightmare that forces her out of her sleep. Waking up in a cold sweat, she hugs herself to calm down and leaves for dinner. Jessica then has dinner with her mother. Catalin and Jessica have an awkward tension between them, sharing accusatory remarks about who is responsible for the distance between them. Catalin then decides to demean her choice in studying dreams, and the professor she works with. Her opinion about her daughter's career choice angers Jessica, who clearly cannot handle her mother's criticism. She blames her for being dishonest, especially about disclosing Jessica's biological father. Catalin then shuts down the argument, and dinner continues in silence. Jessica is in her room, preparing to go to sleep. Before lying in bed, she decides to go through a box, holding a pendulum-like toy. She starts the contraption and places it on her bedside, supposedly something that helps her sleep. The toy gives her comfort, but she is still uneasy and unable to sleep. Jessica leaves the room, her uneasiness getting the better of her and forcing her awake. She walks around the corridors and sees her grandmother's body lying on a couch. Jessica is lying in bed, but feels uneasy. She wakes up to look at the halted pendulum, which has now stopped moving. The toy suddenly starts moving on its own, the door then opening slowly behind it. A red light exposes itself from behind the door, so Jessica walks out of the room to examine the situation outside. She sees a woman crouched on the ground, shuffling through something. Thinking it's her mother, she calls out to the woman, who immediately stops and slowly turns around. Jessica waits to see her mother's face, only for a blood-covered and tattered woman to turn its face to her. It was all a nightmare, so she leaves her bed terribly shaken by the dream. Listening to what Professor Routledge says about how to take control of your own dreams in order to induce a lucid dream, she follows the professor's instructions and finds an image of a person that she specifically wants to speak to in her dream. She goes to study in the house, finding a picture in a family album. She picks up this picture and hoists it against her hip, making her way back to the room. She grabs a bottle of ether and gets ready to knock herself out to enter a dream state again. The picture is placed right next to her as she enters the dream world, falling asleep in her room with the lights constantly flickering around her. After tossing and turning in her sleep and developing a cold sweat all over, she enters the dream world. Now in this new plane of existence, she inspects her surroundings and leaves the room again in her dream. She finds the same woman again, but decides to inspect the rest of the room in this state as well. She sees black and white paintings scattered across the floor. The same blood-covered woman reveals her face again, but Jessica stays in her dream state this time. The woman's face changes, now revealing her to be Rose, her grandmother, from the picture she hoists against her hip. Rose is looking for a key. While Jessica examines a painting of a horse-headed creature, Rose realizes that someone is approaching them, claiming that the cardinal is coming for them, someone that Jessica must stay away from. Jessica must make sure that she stays away from the horse, a warning that Rose heeds for her safety. Suddenly, her grandfather Winston appears in the dream world, seizing Rose and stopping her from speaking further. The dream now moves into a vision of Winston crucifying Jessica, showing him enjoying the wretched sight before him. Blood covers her face, and she bleeds through holes made in her hands. Jessica wakes up from this nightmare, shaken immensely by what unfolded in her dreams. She wakes up and walks over to the kitchen, meeting her mother and making breakfast. Catalin can see that she is in horrible condition, concluding that she had a nightmare. Jessica having a nightmare seems commonplace to her, so she keeps preparing breakfast normally, and the two begin to reminisce about a happy memory in their past. However, this happy memory was Jessica's grandfather's funeral, making her mother seem even more insensitive to her. Jessica then decides to ask about her grandmother, trying to learn about her cause of passing. Her mother reveals that Jessica's grandmother, Rose, out of the window. She had been taking care of Rose, but could not help her with her mental illness at the end of her life. Jessica, disclosing her dream from last night, tries to find out what her mother might know about the key. Jessica remains serious about the situation as Catalin disregards the important. Catalin does not believe in the dream world like her daughter, so she justifies Rose's and Jessica's dreams as unimportant and ignorable. She further deduces that Jessica is sick, checking for fever and deciding to call a doctor to help with her sickness. Jessica realizes her mother will never give her a straightforward response, so she leaves the garden to meet George, another person capable of giving her answers. George is more open-minded about the situation and willing to answer Jessica's questions. Rose was having unexplainable visions, supposedly bad dreams. George does not think that Rose was losing her mind before her inevitable passing, but there was no understanding of what the old woman had to say for herself. Rose had been arguing with Jessica's mother a lot before her passing as well. Jessica leaves the conversation, grateful for George's answers to her question. Jessica inspects the attic, from where Rose had supposedly. She examines the area around it to spot anything resembling a key, while the wind moves the eerie decor of the attic behind her. She goes through some of Rose's belongings, finding a necklace and a large number of paintings as well. She sees a picture of Horsehead, identifying him to be the cardinal. The paintings Rose left behind tell some sort of story about the cardinal. There is one sheet talking about Catalin as someone important in the dream world. The rest of the paintings follow a narrative about the cardinal. They show his role as a punisher for all, alongside some weapons, mirroring-like objects, crosses, and Horsehead himself. The sequence of paintings ends with a church, a place that Jessica can identify and decides to visit. Jessica examines the church from the outside, finding no answer to her questions there. At night, Jessica goes through the paintings again, looking specifically at the cardinal and trying to learn more about him. Unable to find any answers in the real world, she consumes the ether again, slowly becoming more and more sleepy. She enters the world of dreams another time, this time with the paintings that Rose drew surrounding her so that she can solve the mystery her grandmother left behind. In her dream, she is lying next to a wolf, a creature appearing inside the paintings Rose drew. Jessica is sleeping in her dreams, but the wolf wakes her up as if it needs something from her. Jessica wakes up and feels the wolf's fur against her skin, eventually letting it walk away and lead her outside the room she woke up in. Even though it is the dream world, Jessica does not risk the repercussions of a different plane of existence leading to some real-life danger. As a result, she is very careful, even in her dreams. Jessica climbs a staircase and reaches the attic slowly and carefully. She reaches an attic-like space, where the lights suddenly turn on before her and reveal her pendulum toy. The toy starts ticking and gradually speeds up. From behind a curtain, the cardinal appears. Horsehead's appearance causes Jessica a great deal of discomfort, suddenly pushing her into becoming more and more manic. In her mania, the cardinal seems to be injecting visions into her head, burdening her immensely and causing her extreme anguish. A sequence of images flashes in her head, and she cannot take the pain of such an experience any longer. She screams, and a door closes in her visions, apparently bringing her back into the real world. Jessica is still dazed, but her mother enters the room and sees her daughter lying in the bundles of painting. Catalin first scolds her daughter for going through what she believes to be Rose's works of delusion, but ushers in a doctor shortly after. Still dazed, Jessica cannot process her surroundings, so she lets the doctor take some of her blood for testing, while the doctor carries out no further procedure, recommending Jessica take hot baths and immediately leaving. Jessica heeds the doctor's advice and takes a hot bath, only for her to be in her dream state again. She is in a pool of water, swimming through the abyss as it seems that she is reaching nowhere. She suddenly hears the rattling of metal, immediately making her way to the sound. She still cannot see anything under the water, so she swims further until she sees Rose in front of her, tossing a white dress at her. Confused, Jessica is startled at first, but collects herself and starts swimming again. Suddenly, a metal staff stabs through the surface of the water, missing Jessica. The cardinal is trying to hunt her down like a fish in a pond. He jabs again, grazing her cheek and causing her to bleed from the inflicted area. She leaves the bathtub, still with a scratch across her face. However, she was taking a bath in her dream state, her injury feeling real to her. In the kitchen, Catalin prepares soup for her daughter. Jim takes it up to Jessica, who is now awake in her room. Jessica seems more comfortable with Jim, smiling as he enters the room. Her stepfather hands her the soup and tries to talk Jessica out of her issues with her mother. Suddenly, Jim has a change in attitude, and Jessica finds it hard to process her surroundings. Suddenly, it seems that Jessica is hallucinating, her interaction with Jim playing out completely in her head. Jessica is now lying next to her mother. Catalin embraces her daughter, but suddenly things heat up even more for more touching and feeling. The two are kissing as the mother and daughter engage in what would normally be considered to be taboo. Her mother, in her hallucination, slaps her daughter for acting the way that she is, punishing her and sending her to a corner. Jessica listens to Catalin and walks over to a mirror, seeing that her lips are covered in something red. Meanwhile, her mother begins making love with another person, this time an unidentifiable man. Jessica looks back to her mother, with the man now approaching her. Back in the real world, Catalin and Jim are looking over her, but they are unaware of what Jessica is going through. Catalin insists that they let her sleep through the night, leaving her daughter in her nightmare to fend for herself. Jessica is still in the dream world, but she is in a poorly lit room. Walking around with a shabby gas lamp, she climbs up a staircase and tries to examine her surroundings, searching for the key. She then enters a vision, seeing her mother praying while Winston watches over her. Her grandfather, in his youth, seems to be very stern with her mother, possibly an explanation for why Catelyn is mean to her own daughter. Craving for her father's approval, Catelyn keeps praying at his command. She also proclaims to be the Immaculate One, a title left unexplained. Eventually, Winston indulges in prayer himself, but ends it and starts pulling something from his mouth. Watching such a horrific event before her, Jessica starts reciting a mantra to herself. This mantra is supposed to wake her up, and the scared woman now feels that she is too shaken up by the events to stay in the dream world. Winston pulls out a white coin from his mouth and places it inside Catelyn's, who continues praying at her father's command. Jessica wakes up with her mother and stepfather in her room. She shouts as she re-enters reality, breathing heavily and sitting up immediately. She asks her mother about St. Winston, a chapel in their town. Catelyn mentions that her father would scare her with the mention of the place as somewhere naughty children are sent. When questioned about the Immaculate One, Catelyn stops the discussion and dismisses Jessica's dreams once again, now angry at Jim for being supportive of Jessica's delusion. Jim tries to speak well about Catelyn, leaving Jessica with water and medicine. Catelyn and her husband talk about Jessica in the other room. The mother reveals that she does not want to entertain any thought of supporting Jessica's endeavors, fearing that Rose's passing might be an example of how her daughter might lose her life as well. Jim listens to his wife, and then asks to meet with George so they can dispose of all of Rose's belongings. Meanwhile, Jessica is trying to get comfortable and fall asleep again. George is smoking a pipe outside when Jim comes and informs him of Catelyn's request. However, Jim wants answers to a few questions himself. He asks the same questions as Jessica, but George, this time, leaves an ambiguous answer and talks about the stress of supporting the family. George then offers to answer Jim after he is done clearing out her belongings the following day. Jessica is entering the dream world again. Gears turn, lights flicker, and the woman sleeps, in reality, to wake up in a world of imagination. George goes through Rose's belongings the next morning. Having to throw them out, he is reminiscing one last time. Rose's locket, however, is not something he can easily throw away. He kisses the jewelry and keeps it for himself. Jim then approaches him for answers, but instead of being told the truth, he is given her notebook. Jim, having gone through the book, heads to a church. He knocks at the door, but the church's priest is cleaning up graffiti outside. The two share introductions until they sit together and start talking about Jim's worries. He asks the priest about Catelyn, who had a rebellious phase as a teenager. The phase came as a result of her father being extremely stern and influential over her, eventually leading to an important event taking place in the church before them. The priest does not elaborate, however, leaving Jim without an answer at first. In the dream world, Jessica is lying in a void until the wolf wakes her up again. This time, Jessica and the wolf are outside the church. Inside one of the rooms, an infant's bed is rocking. Jessica looks inside the cradle and uncovers intestines before her. Suddenly, her visions begin to change. Jessica rapidly sees a sequence of events. She first recalls her experience with Rose, reminded again of the key. She then sees the paintings again, and has a realization that she herself is the key. Then she sees her mother, pregnant with silver stakes, stabbed into her belly. Her father seems to be torturing her, as Catelyn asks for her father's mercy. Declaring once again that she is the Immaculate One, Catelyn finally explains that she is giving birth to Jessica, who should have already passed away. In the morning, Jessica enters the dining room to eat with her family. Her mother is angry that the sick woman in the house is out and about when she should be resting. Jessica ignores her mother and decides to get answers from her in a straightforward manner. Jessica asks Catelyn about her biological father, but her mother does not want to go into details for her curious daughter. A touchy subject, Catelyn leaves her daughter with no answer and just changes the subject. Jessica has heard enough from her disrespectful mother and gets up from the table to leave. Being sick, she is unable to stand up properly and falls down immediately as she leaves her seat. Jim helps her up and escorts her back into her room, where she falls asleep again. In her dream, she sees the wolf again. It wakes her up, revealing a cot with red curtains all around. The wolf then leaves, Jessica following after it. Simultaneously, Catelyn calls the doctor again in the real world. She decides that the situation is getting worse, and her worries are prompting her to take drastic measures to solve her daughter's issue. Meanwhile, Jessica is traversing through the dream world, eventually reaching a telephone through which she can hear her mother's conversation with the doctor. She listens in and realizes that her mother wants to drug her into losing her ability to sleep, but she decides to stop listening and continue with her work through the dreams. At the end of the conversation between Catelyn and the doctor in the real world, the doctor reveals that Jessica is pregnant. Jessica, still in the dream world, traverses through this fantastical plane of existence alongside the wolf. She leaves the building and walks outside, where the cardinal seems to be lurking. Jessica sees the cardinal. She sees the wolf again to her right, taking Jessica away from the cardinal. The two traverse through the river on a boat, staying away from Horsehead as they do so. Simultaneously, in the real world, her mother is trying to wake her out of her dream. Jessica stays in the dream world until she is back at the church again. There, she stops and sees the cardinal again when the wolf beside her suddenly starts to growl. Her mother, in the real world, pulls out a pill supposedly meant to make her stop dreaming. However, Jessica's sleep persists as she witnesses a showdown between the wolf and the cardinal. The wolf, her sole ally throughout her journey in the dream world, pounces at the cardinal, but immediately gets slashed by the cardinal's weapon. The wolf has lost, perishing in the dream world as a result. Meanwhile, Catalin is trying to force her daughter into taking her medicine. Jessica does not wake up, instead starting to struggle against her mother's efforts to drug her. Regaining consciousness, Jessica takes the pill and drinks. She shows her mother her empty mouth, finally getting rid of Catalin. Jessica hid the pill in her mouth, so she spits it out, following her mother's exit, and prepares to enter the dream world again. An obstacle forms as she does so, unable to control her fear of the uncertainty in the dream world. She cannot take her ether medicine to fall asleep, but eventually dozes off anyway. Now in the dream world again, Jessica is sitting next to the wolf. The wolf whimpers as its life is slowly ending. Jessica, still trying to find the key, decides to look inside the injured creature's wound. She fishes something out of the wound and makes her way back into the church. Jessica casually walks in as a vision unfolds before her. Winston and Rose perform some sort of ritual, as Catalin seems to be giving birth at an altar in the church. Catalin is in great pain, but the two show no expressions and carry out the delivery of a child without showing a single emotion. Eventually, a child is born, appearing in the hands of Rose. Oddly enough, the child does not cry at all. She takes the infant over to the cot and sets it down, her job now over. Suddenly, Catalin starts struggling again, preparing to give birth once more. Now in greater anguish, Rose makes her way to pick up a second child. This child is born crying, but quiets down at the sight of its mother's face. Winston then talks to his daughter, as she is still crying from the pain of childbirth. Winston reveals that the first child was born without ever having seen life, while the second born should not have been born at all, forbidding the second child into their lives. Winston leaves his daughter to deal with her new children. The first one is given the name Lucy, a name that shall be engraved upon a gravestone instead of a birth certificate. The second child is given the name Jessica, who now sees the truth about her birth. Jessica leaves the church and reaches her house again. She climbs a staircase and finds Rose holding baby Jessica and walking around the attic. This vision of Rose with her young self eventually leads to another vision. Jessica inspects the attic, seeing the same decorations as the ones from her attic in the real world. Suddenly, as she inspects her surroundings, the cardinal appears before her. Fearing for her safety, Jessica runs to evade the cardinal and reaches the window of the attic, the same window from which her grandmother leapt to meet her demise. She falls into a pool of water, but this time, the dive leads into another vision. Jessica is in the same bed with the red curtains again. She inspects the key that she procured from the wolf prior, trying to get out of bed. However, she is suddenly unable to walk, constantly falling on the ground. Her mother reveals herself beside her, Catalin now calling Jessica the daughter she never wanted. Catalin then immediately stabs her daughter with one of the stakes attached to her body, injuring her daughter in this vision. Meanwhile, Catalin wakes up in the real world, sensing something is wrong. Back in the dream world, Jessica does not let her mother's words affect her. She takes the stake that stabbed her and stabs her mother again, now proclaiming her to be a miser for never owning up to her own mistake. Jessica then finds herself crawling up the staircase, eventually reaching the attic again. She reaches the middle of the room, but is unable to get up on her feet. However, she appears in another body, deciding to take action and move toward a wall covered in red wallpaper. She starts ripping through until the cardinal appears behind her. She is able to escape the cardinal and starts running away. Meanwhile, in the real world, it seems that Jessica has also made her way to the attic, with the same stab wound from her dream and the key around her neck. Differentiating between the dream world and the real world is now difficult, as the dream seems to affect her in real life. Jim and Catalin find Jessica lying on the ground, worried about Jessica's well-being. Jim sends Catalin away to call for the doctor, while Jessica is still dealing with the cardinal in the dream world. Jessica eventually finds a closed wooden door, but still has the cardinal to deal with. The cardinal is able to reach Jessica until, finally, Jessica needs to now fight her way back. Suddenly, she receives an opportunity, presented to her in the form of a weapon. She takes the metal staff, stabs the cardinal with it, and unlocks the door for her escape. In the middle of a room, a strange pod covered in vessels seems to be reacting to the occurrences in the dream. The cardinal is still struggling with the wound inflicted upon him by Jessica, now slowly succumbing to his injury. Jessica looks at the pod with anticipation. She waits for the pod to open, as a hand seems to be struggling to break through the exterior. Eventually, the hand breaks through, and Jessica sees before her a pale duplicate of herself. It is her sister, the one that passed away at birth. The two embrace as siblings unite, Jessica holding her sister in glee. Suddenly, in the real world, Catalin and Jim are holding the lifeless body of Jessica. Something has gone wrong in the dream world, and Jessica slowly realizes it herself. She is together with her twin, but understands the repercussions for such a union in the real world. Her expression of joy turns into fear as Jessica now lies alone in blood-covered rags. Jessica has passed on from the real world, now stuck in her dream forever, and holding the consciousness of herself and her late twin sister.